Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is the Headlines and Tidbits podcast. Here, we dust off forgotten, bizarre, and unbelievable stories pulled straight from old newspapers. In each full episode, I take a single headline that caught my attention, something strange, unsettling, or just too compelling to ignore, and walk you through the real story behind it, the people involved, what happened, and how it unfolded. And today's headline is about Concetto Formica, who was an Italian-American that was tragically murdered while working as a musician in a carnival. Sadly, after his death, he became known as the Italian mummy when his body was held for 61 years by the local funeral director. And this story actually comes from my other podcast that I have, which is called the Italian American Stories Podcast. And I did this episode, probably 3 years ago now. But looking back through some of my old episodes of that podcast, this one truly fits with Headlines and Tidbits. It's a wild story, so let's go ahead and dive on into it. And you'll have to excuse my voice. I am recovering from the flu, so I sound a little raspy. Concetto was born in Sicily on September 26, 1888, and his parents were Vincenzo and Pasqua. Now, there are a lot of different names given to Concetto by newspapers and publications. I'll go over some of the names and give an explanation for why I'm referring to him as Concetto Formica. So here are a couple of the names I found. Fiorenzo Concetto, Formico Concetto. Now, I'm choosing to call him Concetto Formica because 1, the last name matches his father. 2, his military records in New York have his name listed as Concetto Formica. 3, his probate records show his name listed as that. And lastly, I found some ship manifests that also have his name listed as Concetto Formica. Now, I could be wrong and could be calling him by the wrong name, but because I found numerous documents with that name listed, I feel safe using that name. So Concetto arrived in America on June 17th, 1907 when he was 18. He came 2 years before his father came to America, and I'm not sure if his mother ever came to America or not. I couldn't find much on her. But when Concetto came to America, he settled in New York City for the first couple of years. And in 1909, he joined the New York Guard Services when he was 21 years old. And he was in the band in the Guard, and his rank was listed as private. But sometime between 1909 and 1911, Concetto joined the Metropolitan Carnival Company, where he was a musician in the carnival, and he played the trumpet. It looks like from everything that I read, the carnival traveled to various states and towns across the country. So in April of 1911, the carnival workers were setting up their tents and getting ready for a carnival in McCall, South Carolina. Concetto was helping set up the tents, and somehow an argument broke out between him and another band member named Giuseppe. Apparently, Giuseppe and Concetto didn't get along. Concetto would always, I don't want to say tease him, but always talk to him about how you need to stop reading the letters from your family back in Italy and stop praying the rosary all of the time and come join us. And I guess that night, after they were done setting up the carnival tents, Giuseppe was in his tent reading a letter. So Concetto snuck into the tent, grabbed the letter, and took off running. Now, when he was running away, he tripped over one of the ropes holding a tent down and fell to the ground. And because of this, Giuseppe was able to catch up to him, and he hit Concetto over the head with a tent stake. And the tent stake was actually described as being 3 feet long, wooden, and had a metal ring on it. And Concetto was immediately knocked unconscious and was taken by wagon to Scotland Hospital in Laurinburg, North Carolina. And he only ended up living for 12 hours after the incident and passed away in the hospital at the age of 23. He reportedly died on April 28th, 1911. So the hospital, they called the M.A. McDougald Funeral Home to come and get Concetto's body. John McDougald was the one who came and got the body, and the proprietor of the carnival company instructed John to embalm the body. John was able to get a hold of Concetto's father, Vincenzo, who was actually traveling with a different carnival, and Vincenzo arrived at the funeral home a few days later with an interpreter. He paid a $20 deposit on the $42 bill for the funeral costs, and he promised to pay the rest in a few days, but he also told John that he needed to get a hold of their family that was still in Italy to see what they should do with the body. Now, I did read an article where John told a reporter about his interaction with Vincenzo, and John said, quote, "When I got the $20 down in my jeans, I got mean. I told him he wasn't going to get anything until he paid the rest of the bill. The reporter then asked John how Vincenzo reacted to this, and John said, quote, "Oh hell, he came back, then cried a little, but when he found out he was going to have to put out money, it was a different tune, and that dried up his tears." So I don't know, that's a really interesting interaction, and we're only hearing John's side of the story, so who knows. But John also showed the reporter a contract he had Vincenzo sign. The contract reads, "This empowers M.A. McDougall to hold my son's body until he is fully satisfied for service rendered, and that I agree to send balance due on above in a reasonable length of time. If not in a reasonable length of time, then M.A. McDougall will dispose of the body as he wishes, to be buried in town cemetery of Laurinburg, North Carolina. Signed, Vincenzo Formica." So after this, John never heard from Vincenzo again. However, he did receive a letter from the family in Italy asking for the body to be sent to Italy. They also requested that Concetto not be buried in an American cemetery that is not Catholic. So I'm guessing the family added this just in case, Concetto couldn't be sent back to Italy. So I actually ended up listening to an interview on funeral radio with John McDougall's grandson, and his name was Beecham. He explained the circumstances of what happened with Concetto's body. Beecham claimed that after his grandfather received the letter, he had to find an interpreter to write a letter back to the family in Italy. He found an Italian Catholic priest to help him write a letter back to the family. The letter informed the family of the cost of a coffin, the cost of the train ride to get the body to a ship, and the cost to ship the body to Italy. Beecham said his grandfather also told the family that there were no Catholic cemeteries in rural North Carolina. John never heard back from the family, and Concetto's father never came back to claim the body. Because Concetto's body was embalmed, he eventually mummified, or as Beecham put it, all the moisture evaporated from his body. So the McDougalls left the body in the embalming room at the funeral home. They tied a rope around his chest and hung him up on the wall. So that's quite the image there. After a few years, they eventually moved Concetto's body to a box instead of just being strapped up to the wall by a rope. John McDougall said that he couldn't bury Concetto because he promised Vincenzo, Concetto's father, he would not bury him without further instructions from the family, which is weird because he also had that contract with him that if he didn't come back within a certain amount of time, he could bury the body. So because of this, Concetto remained with the McDougall family and became part of the local lore in Laurinburg, North Carolina. The McDougall family moved Concetto's body to a glass case and placed him in the funeral home's garage. And once he was in the garage, he was basically put on display for the town to come and see. Beecham, in his interview, explained how there was not a lot to do in Laurinburg, North Carolina at this time. So on Friday and Saturday nights, they would leave the garage open for the locals to come look at Concetto. People would go into the garage, open up Concetto's glass case, and take a peek at him. Then at 9 p.m., they would close the garage door and the evening activities would be done. Beecham explained that Concetto eventually became known to the locals as Spaghetti because Concetto Formica was too exotic of a name for the locals to pronounce. Now, at this point, I'm not going to lie, I'm feeling a little irritated with this. I mean, I get that it was a different time, but this poor man was not laid to rest and is not even going by his real name. And in that contract that was signed, it said that if his father did not come back, he could lay him to rest. And I just wish he would have been laid to rest a little earlier. But I at least hope that the McDougall family didn't do all of this out of a disrespect or as a way to gain fame. And I really don't want to rag on this family because maybe they did have good intentions, but letting people come in and open up his case and view him is a whole nother ball game. Now, going back to the interview with Beecham, he recalled a couple of interesting stories about Concetto. The first story he told was how one year the funeral home added an intercom system to the entire building, including the garage where Concetto was. Now, I forgot to mention that the McDougalls actually lived at the funeral home, so their home and their business was one building. There were two neighborhood boys, Sandy and Doug, who always came around to check out Concetto. Well, one day, Beecham's father dared Doug, who was said to be the brave one, to stay in the garage for 10 minutes in the dark, and Concetto's glass case had to be open the whole time. Doug quickly agreed because he had always been around Concetto, but he didn't know that there was an intercom system now. So once Doug was in the dark garage, Beecham's father got on the intercom and said, "Doug, get me out of here." Apparently, Doug ran out of the garage, ran all the way home, and hid under his bed. The second story Beecham told was about a time when he was home from college. Apparently, he was sitting outside the garage watching people walk in and out of the garage to look at Concetto. I think he had a little bit of a prankster streak in him like his father because he concocted an idea to scare the looky-loos. He got a large piece of cardboard and cut it into the shape of a body, basically the same shape and size as Concetto's. Then he dyed the cardboard with brown shoe polish to match Concetto's skin color. He then placed the cardboard cutout in front of Concetto's case and tied a string to the cardboard head. Then, when people would approach what they thought was Concetto, Beecham would pull on the string, making it look like Concetto was moving. Beecham said he was getting a pretty good kick out of it until someone fell back against his dad's car, denting the hood. Okay, so as much as I hate the fact that Concetto's body was exploited, I probably would have laughed watching people run out of the garage too. Beecham went on to explain that he knows that this whole situation seems strange to most people, but for him, Concetto's body was in their garage his whole life, so it was not that big of a deal to him. So life went on for the McDougalds and the residents of Laurinburg, North Carolina, and Concetto remained a part of the community for 61 years. But in 1972, an Italian congressman, Mario Biaggi from New York, came to Concetto's rescue. Mario was shocked when he learned about Concetto's story, and he felt like it was extremely disrespectful and that Italians were being slandered. Mario was quoted saying, "The entire matter is shocking to say the least, and does not reflect on the good sense and Christian character of the great state of North Carolina." He also called it a ghoulish attraction. So after a lot of phone calls from Mario, action started taking place to finally put Concetto to rest. Biaggi wanted to know the exact amount that it would cost to bury Concetto. McDougald wasn't sure of the exact cost, but told Mario that a 25-cent day storage fee was reasonable. But 25 cents multiplied by 365 days, then multiplied by 61 years, comes out to $5,505.25. And this was in 1972. Today, that would be about $45,000. Biaggi, the congressman from New York, went head-to-head with a lot of people from North Carolina, including reporters. One reporter from Raleigh, North Carolina, really infuriated Mario when he wrote an article about Concetto, claiming, "Everybody in Laurinburg calls the corpse spaghetti. It may be an ethnic slur, but it's easier than trying to remember or to pronounce Ferenzio Concipio." First of all, not even his real name, and I don't even know where this guy is getting. It's so far off the mark. So Mario wrote back to this reporter saying that the whole affair is actually an insult. John Beecham's granddaughter, Isla, was extremely upset with Mario and said that he basically made the story sound a lot worse than it really was. She claimed that this controversy made it seem like her family was trying to make money off of Concetto by either charging people to come see his body or by getting others to pay for the burial. She insisted both were not true. She also told a reporter that Concetto, she called him Spaghetti, was a part of her family. She even took field trips with her school to her own family home to visit Concetto. She hated to see him buried and insisted that most of the town would agree with her. She even went on to claim that she sees no difference with keeping Concetto versus digging up mummies and putting them in a museum. The North Carolina State Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers told the McDougalds they had to take Concetto's body down and not display the body in the garage any longer. The executive director and the board told them they are most likely violating state law by displaying the body. McDougald explained he was still awaiting further burial instructions from the family, and he thought it may be illegal for him to bury the body without the family's permission. Again, I go back to the contract Vincenzo signed. It said the body basically became the property of the McDougalds, so in my opinion, he didn't need to worry about getting in trouble with the family. But McDougald received a ruling from a judge in North Carolina to bury Concetto, and on September 30th, 1972, Concetto was buried at the Hillside Cemetery. About 100 people showed up for the Catholic service. The funeral home paid for the headstone. Once the coffin was in the ground, they filled it with 2 tons of concrete to ensure that no one would mess with the body. I tried to find information on Giuseppe, the man who killed Concetto, but I didn't have much luck. I feel like I was lucky to even find his name. I did find an article, though, where McDougald was being interviewed by a reporter from the Star News, and he stated he didn't know much about the killer either, except that he was caught and set loose fairly soon after the murder. Something weird I ran across in that same article was a brief mention that the tent stake was in the glass case with Concetto for all those years. But believe it or not, that wasn't the weirdest thing. The author also said that there were the bodies of 2 premature babies who were born by C-section, but unfortunately they didn't live. The twins' bodies were kept in the glass case with Concetto. I have no idea if this is true or not and couldn't find any more info on it, but I wanted to mention it. I also saw a lot of pictures, well, not a lot of pictures, but a couple of pictures of Concetto. I never saw any other bodies in there, so take it with a grain of salt. This story is so strange. I am grateful for Mario Biaggi, though, and his push to lay Concetto to rest. Even though he was a politician in New York, he recognized that this situation in North Carolina needed to be addressed. Now, I do want to talk about one more thing, Concetto's father. I kept wondering why Vincenzo never showed back up to try and bury his son. So I looked into it and, well, like I said, this is a really strange story. On March 10th, 1912, less than a year after Concetto's death, Vincenzo was found dead on a sidewalk in Decatur, Alabama. The cause of death? A blow to the head, just like his son. So let's dive into the story of Vincenzo Formica. Vincenzo was born in Sicily around 1863. He was married to Pasqua, and they had one son together, Concetto. Vincenzo came to America in November of 1909. I believe it was just him who came over, not his wife. I'm pretty sure she stayed in Italy. I actually did find an article that stated Vincenzo had a wife and kids in Italy, but that his son Concetto was already in America. Vincenzo joined the New York Guard Services in 1909 and was in the same unit as his son. They were in the 22nd Engineers and were both in the Guard Band. In March of 1912, Vincenzo was a musician. He was working for the St. Louis Amusement Company, and it was a carnival company that had just set up in Decatur, Alabama in early March. There were advertisements in the local newspapers trying to get people excited for the carnival that was coming. The ads described the carnival as featuring a two-headed lady, a large Ferris wheel, and the great Italian marching band of Professor Caricia. And Vincenzo was part of that band. But on Sunday, March 10th, 1912, at 10 o'clock at night, Pearl Taylor found the dead body of Vincenzo Formica. Pearl was walking home when she saw Vincenzo laying on the sidewalk. She immediately called the police and informed them of the body. Once the police arrived at the scene and examined the body, they determined that robbery was most likely the motive. Even the undertaker agreed with this because he said that when he examined the body, there was no watch or money on Vincenzo. The police also noted that Vincenzo was obviously hit in the back of the head by a large object. They said the body was still warm and believed the murder happened within the hour. The police said there were no signs of a struggle. Now, I want to go back to the idea of a robbery being the motive for Vincenzo being killed. When police talked to some of Vincenzo's co-workers about the murder, they said that he probably had a lot of money on him because he had been saving up for some time. So if we think back, he was saving money to pay the funeral home to bury his son. He told the undertaker he would be back to pay off the bill, but we know he obviously never came back. So if I had to guess, I would bet Vincenzo was saving his money to bury his son. Another interesting point about these comments is his coworkers knew he was saving money and even said that they were pretty sure he had money on him. So that could be a motive for even his coworkers to kill him. The next day, they arrested Arthur Boyd for the murder of Vincenzo. Boyd was a young farmer who lived in a town near Decatur. Apparently, Boyd was arrested for concealing a pistol, and I'm not sure how the police knew he had a pistol on him. Maybe somebody reported it to them, or a police officer saw that he had a gun, but regardless, he was arrested. And once he was arrested and the police searched him, they actually found out that he was carrying 2 pistols and that he had a considerable amount of cash on him. So of course, this made the police even more suspicious of him, because remember, Vincenzo was carrying a lot of cash. Boyd insisted that the money was his, and he got the money from selling his share of crops. The police had the owner of the carnival come in to see if he could identify Boyd and the pistols. They suspected that one of the pistols may have belonged to Vincenzo. But the carnival owner didn't recognize the man or the pistols. Even though the carnival owner couldn't identify Boyd, Boyd did remain in jail with charges of concealing the pistol. The next day, Boyd was interrogated by the police regarding the murder of Vincenzo. The investigator ultimately believed that Boyd had nothing to do with the murder, and Boyd was released. But a few days later, the police made some more arrests. On March 12th, due to an anonymous tip, the police arrested 5 people: Mary Smith, Josie Jordan, Pearl Taylor, Emily Taylor, and Jim Bibb. Now, Pearl Taylor was the woman who actually found the body of Vincenzo and called the police. I don't know what the anonymous tip was. I couldn't find anything on that, but regardless, these 5 were arrested. And the police hoped that they would gain some substantial evidence by interviewing them. Apparently, though, they never got anything worthwhile because the 5 were released, and a few days later, 2 more suspects were arrested: Don Alfonso and J.T. Hicks. Don and J.T. were performers with the same carnival company as Vincenzo, and apparently the police received another tip that these 2 guys were involved in the murder. Once the 2 men were interrogated by the investigators, they determined that Hicks threatened the life of Vincenzo on account of Hicks' wife. I don't know the details surrounding this incident, but kind of interesting. Further evidence that the police claimed they had were witness accounts stating that the 2 men were seen with Vincenzo shortly before he was murdered. They did search Don and JT's homes, but didn't recover anything substantial, and both men denied their guilt and insisted they had nothing to do with the murder of Vincenzo. The preliminary hearings and the trial itself were postponed multiple times due to attorney and solicitors not being able to be at the hearings, and the case ultimately never went to trial because on March 24th, 1912, John and JT were released from jail and all murder charges were dropped. I guess the two men's stories were not lining up with the actual details of the murder, and their stories in general were conflicting with the evidence. It was also stated that there was just not enough evidence to hold the two men. Now, Don and JT never returned to work with the carnival, and the murder of Vincenzo was never solved. I searched everywhere online and couldn't find any more details on whether anybody else was arrested. My guess is authorities just dropped the case after this. Now, I can't help but wonder who paid for Vincenzo to be buried, because he was buried in the Decatur City Cemetery. Now, as far as I know, he didn't have any relatives in America. Concetto was it, and he died a few months before Vincenzo. Now, he had his wife in Italy, so I mean, if maybe she paid for him to be buried, but why wouldn't she pay for the son to be buried? So I don't know, maybe the carnival company, the city, maybe there was a fund for people who were victims of a violent crime. So it's hard to say, but at least they were both eventually put to rest, and it's sad that they both came to such violent ends. But that's where we'll leave the story of Concetto and Vincenzo Formica. Thank you so much for listening to Headlines and Tidbits. If you enjoyed this episode, consider following or subscribing so you don't miss future stories pulled from the pages of the past. Until next time.